The Sunda clouded leopard entered the ravine before the forest noticed the sun was lowering. Above, the canopy still held light. Leaves caught it unevenly, scattering gold and green across trunks and vines. In the open forest, visibility remained workable, patchy, layered, predictable. The ravine was different. It cut through the slope sharply, a narrow incision where water had taken the easiest route downward over centuries. Its sides were steep, overgrown, and crowded with roots that gripped exposed soil. Even at midday, light reached the bottom reluctantly. Now it failed quickly. The leopard moved along the upper edge first, body stretched low, tail extended for balance. Its coat blended perfectly into the broken pattern of shadow and bark. Rosettes dissolved against leaf litter. Limbs placed weight softly, precisely. This was not movement for travel, this was holding. The ravine shade was an asset, but only briefly. Light failed here earlier than anywhere else in the forest, collapsing downward rather than fading evenly. One moment, shapes were readable. The next, depth vanished. The leopard knew this. It stopped where a fallen tree bridged the ravine, its trunk angled downward, roots torn free on one side. From here, multiple paths converged, animal trails that dipped into the ravine to cross, then climbed out again toward feeding trees uphill. Prey used these crossings routinely, they trusted timing. The leopard lowered itself along the trunk, claws gripping bark without sound. It settled into a crouch halfway down, body suspended between trunk and air, hind legs braced, front paws relaxed, but ready. Below, the ravine breathed differently. Cool air pooled here, sinking as the day lost heat. Smell gathered low, drifting sluggishly rather than dispersing. Sounds travelled upward in fragments, snapped twigs, wing beats, the brief panic of insects retreating. The leopard waited. Time moved differently in shade. Light above remained stable, but the ravine darkened rapidly. Contrast sharpened, then disappeared. Colours collapsed into tone. The leopard's pupils widened. Vision adjusted faster than the forest around it. Movement came from the far side first. A bearded piglet stepped into the ravine path cautiously, nose close to the ground, ears twitching. It paused, uncertain. The air smelled wrong here, cooler, heavier, layered with old moisture. The leopard did not move. Another pig followed, larger, less careful. It entered the ravine more confidently, trusting the path and the light that still held above. Then the light failed. Not gradually. Suddenly. The ravine dropped into shadow as the sun slipped behind a ridge the forest could not see. What had been dim became unreadable in seconds. Edges vanished. Depth flattened. The pigs reacted instantly. They froze, not because of sound, but because orientation failed. The path beneath their feet no longer resolved cleanly. Shadows overlapped. The leopard moved. It did not leap immediately. It slid. The body flowed down the trunk, releasing and catching bark in controlled sequence. No sound, no wasted motion. Gravity assisted without accelerating beyond control. The strike came from above and behind. One pig bolted blindly, colliding with roots. The other turned too late. The leopard closed the distance in 2 steps and made contact cleanly, driving the prey sideways into the ravine wall where movement was restricted. The kill was fast. The leopard held position briefly after, still, alert, listening for response from the forest above. None came. Sound did not travel well into the ravine once light failed. The body was dragged deeper into shade, away from the path. The leopard fed quickly but not carelessly, pausing often to listen. Shade concealed, but it also trapped. Escape routes here were limited. As full darkness settled, the ravine became a void, cool, damp, silent. The forest above still held residual light, but it no longer mattered. The leopard climbed back onto the fallen trunk and paused, scanning upward. This place worked, but only because light failed fast. If the delay had been longer, if dusk had softened instead of collapsed, the advantage would have vanished. Prey would have crossed earlier. Depth would have remained readable. The ravine was not always useful. It was useful at the moment of failure. The leopard moved away quietly, carrying what it needed into denser forest where shade did not change so abruptly. Behind it, the ravine lay empty again. Just a cut in the forest floor, waiting for the next day when light would hesitate too long above and fail too quickly below. The ravine did not reset overnight. Light returned in the morning, but not trust. The Sunda-clouded leopard approached the same crossing later the next day, not because it expected repetition, but because it needed confirmation. Places that worked once often failed the second time, not because they changed, but because everything else did. The forest above the ravine was active early. Birds moved first, loud and inefficient, shaking insects loose from leaves. Small mammals followed, using the brief safety of daylight to reposition. The ravine, however, remained quiet longer than usual. That mattered. The leopard did not descend immediately. It stayed higher on the slope, moving parallel to the ravine, using elevation to read traffic without committing. Its body language was loose but controlled, tail hanging low, ears rotating constantly. The shade arrived at the same time as before, but the response did not. Prey approached the ravine differently now. A group of pigs stopped well before the path dipped. They tested the air longer than usual, lifting their heads higher, watching the canopy instead of the ground. One stepped forward, then retreated again, circling upslope rather than crossing directly. They remembered. The ravine had not changed. Timing had. The leopard adjusted its position, moving farther along the ravine edge to a secondary crossing where the slope was steeper and vegetation denser. This crossing was less obvious, used less frequently, but it shared the same flaw. Light failed abruptly here as well. The leopard waited again. This time, the delay was longer. The forest above remained bright. Light filtered through canopy gaps at oblique angles, confusing depth perception but not eliminating it. The ravine darkened gradually rather than collapsing into shadow. That reduced advantage. A muntjac approached alone, cautious, stopping frequently. It did not enter the ravine fully. Instead, it paced the edge, testing sound and scent, then backed away and crossed higher where the slope was gentler but exposure greater. The leopard did not pursue. Chasing uphill in uneven light wasted energy and removed the only advantage the ravine offered. The leopard remained still, letting opportunity pass. Waiting here had a cost. As light lingered, insects remained active. Sound persisted. The ravine did not seal itself off as quickly. The moment of failure, when depth vanished completely, was delayed. When it finally came, it was incomplete. Shadows layered instead of flattening. Shapes remained partially readable. Movement did not disorient prey as thoroughly as before. A pig crossed late, but it crossed fast, committing to speed rather than caution. It did not hesitate at the darkest point. It sprinted, trusting momentum. The leopard launched anyway. The strike almost succeeded. Almost. The pig slipped once on damp soil, corrected, and burst up slope with a head start the leopard could not erase without full acceleration. The leopard aborted immediately, stopping in shade, muscles tight, breathing controlled. Failure was clean, information was not. The leopard withdrew without feeding that evening, not hungry, alert. The ravine was no longer a surprise, it was becoming a known risk. Over the following days, the leopard tested the ravine less often, visiting at different times, from different angles, measuring how prey responded to shifting light patterns. Some animals crossed earlier, others avoided entirely. A few used the ravine only in full darkness, when light failure was total and no longer directional. That removed advantage again. The leopard adapted by using the ravine not as a kill site, but as a filter. It held positions just outside the deepest shade, intercepting animals that rerouted upslope to avoid the crossing. These routes were steeper, narrower, and more exposed, but predictable. The leopard made one successful kill this way, not in the ravine, because of it. The forest learned slowly. Prey did not abandon the ravine completely, but they stopped trusting it blindly. They tested more. They crossed earlier or later. They accepted longer routes to avoid sudden loss of depth. The leopard accepted fewer opportunities in exchange for better ones. The ravine shade remained useful, but only as part of a larger pattern. It could no longer be relied upon alone. Timing, position, and restraint mattered more than before. The leopard moved its core hunting area slightly upslope, where shade arrived more gradually but held longer. Here, light did not fail fast, but it also did not return suddenly. Stability replaced surprise. The ravine remained behind, still darkening early, still collapsing light unevenly, but now it was a known shape in the forest's behavior, and in a system where everything learned, the advantage shifted, not to the place that failed fastest, but to the hunter that adapted before expectation erased surprise completely. The first change did not come from sound or smell, it came from alignment. The Sunda clouded leopard noticed it while moving along an upper ridge above the ravine, where the forest thinned slightly and the canopy broke into irregular gaps. One of those gaps was new, not fresh enough to smell of sap, not old enough to have softened at the edges. A straight break. Leaves had been cut back in a narrow line, branches trimmed rather than torn. The ground beneath was cleaner, less layered with rot. Light fell through this opening at a different angle, striking the slope below earlier than it should have. A trail, not wide, not busy, but intentional. The leopard stopped and watched how the light behaved. Where the trail crossed the ravine, sunlight reached deeper, longer. The sudden collapse of shadow that had once defined the place no longer happened cleanly. Instead, light leaked downward in fragments, delaying the moment when depth failed entirely. That mattered more than presence. Humans did not need to stay for long to change this place. They only needed to move light. Over the next days, the leopard adjusted its routes to avoid the trail's immediate vicinity, circling farther upslope and using denser vegetation. From there, it observed indirectly. People passed through intermittently, sometimes alone, sometimes in pairs. They did not stop in the ravine, they did not descend. They crossed above it, following the cut line that held firmer footing and clearer visibility. Their movement created rhythm. Morning passes. Late afternoon returns. Light followed. Where boots pressed ground flat, understory plants thinned. Where branches were trimmed, the canopy lifted. Where the canopy lifted, shade arrived later and left earlier. The ravine changed again. Not in shape, in timing. The cool air still pooled below, but sunlight now disturbed it sooner. Cold drained unevenly. Smell no longer collected as densely. Sound travelled farther upward. The ravine stopped sealing itself. Prey responded first. Pigs altered crossing times, avoiding the period when light lingered unpredictably. Some crossed earlier, when visibility was still good everywhere. Others waited until full darkness, when light failed uniformly instead of directionally. Both choices reduced confusion. The leopard felt this immediately. The old window, the brief collapse where depth vanished suddenly, was shrinking. Sometimes it did not form at all. The leopard tested once, holding position along the fallen trunk again, waiting for the familiar moment. It did not come. Instead, shadows layered slowly. Edges remained readable. The ravine darkened, but not abruptly enough to disorient movement. The leopard withdrew without attempting a strike. That place was no longer reliable. The forest continued to change subtly. More trails appeared. Not many, but enough to fragment canopy in ways that mattered. Some were animal paths widened by human use. Others were temporary, created by repeated passage and then abandoned. Each one redirected light. Each one adjusted how fast shade arrived and how completely it held. The leopard adapted by moving farther from linear gaps and closer to areas where canopy remained chaotic. Fallen trees, storm-damaged sections, tangled vine masses. These places did not allow light to behave predictably. Here, shade arrived unevenly but stayed complex. Complexity replaced speed. Hunting success stabilized again, but with more effort. The leopard hunted closer to ground level now, relying less on vertical ambush and more on lateral interception. It used trunks, buttress roots, and rock clusters rather than ravine edges. The ravine itself became secondary, not useless, but compromised. One evening, the leopard watched humans stop briefly near the trail crossing, standing where the ravine widened slightly. They spoke quietly, pointed downslope, then moved on. No lights, no noise afterward. Still, the effect remained. The next day, sunlight reached the ravine floor nearly an hour earlier than before. Frost-like coolness dissipated faster. Insects became active sooner. The air mixed instead of pooling. The leopard did not return that day. It did not need to test again. The lesson was already clear. Light no longer belonged entirely to the slope and canopy. It belonged partly to paths, where they ran, how often they were used, and how much vegetation they displaced. The ravine would never behave exactly as it had again. That did not mean abandonment. It meant recalibration. The leopard adjusted its territory subtly, expanding laterally rather than vertically. It favoured shadowed basins not yet intersected by trails, and transitional zones where light still failed unevenly, but without human guidance. Surprise became rarer, patience became more valuable. As night fell one evening, the leopard passed near the ravine without stopping. It did not look down, it did not slow. Below, the ravine darkened gradually, predictably, no longer collapsing into shadow in a single moment. The light failed, but it failed on schedule now. And in a forest where schedules replaced suddenness, survival no longer depended on holding the fastest shade, but on knowing where unpredictability still lived. The leopard moved on, already searching for those places.